It still says we're going live. And Kayla, you use StreamYard too, right, on your podcast?
Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you for the recommend.
Yeah, so we're live, and it looks like Jane Cabrera is super happy to check out what this quote unquote mama bear has to say. She even put a little emoji of a bear. So this will be super exciting. Look, we're on a ton of different platforms right now, and I'm super happy to be talking with Kayla Svedin, our special guest today. She's a mother located in Arizona, and she takes advantage of some of the school choice options that are available in Arizona. She has firsthand experience with these things called microschools, which are the national rage going on right now because a lot of families are seeing that their schools aren't going to reopen. So they're figuring out that we got to do something else outside of the establishment system. And they're doing things called microschools, or if you want to call them homeschool co-ops or pandemic pods is the new hip word that people are using. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about, Kayla, and we're super happy to have you. And it looks like we already have a ton of people that have jumped on. So look, you're attracting a lot of people, and we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So again, I guess Matthew, instead of having you do the formal introduction, since I've already introduced Kayla, essentially, it's Kayla Svedin again. Also, myself, as everybody knows, I am Corey DeAngelis, Executive Director at the Educational Freedom Institute, and of course, my co-host with me today, as usual, is Matthew Nielsen. He is the co-founder of the Educational Freedom Institute, and he's currently the president of the board of the Educational Freedom Institute as well. So without further ado, we just want to thank again Kayla for joining us on our show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Hey, real quick, let's just mention too that Kayla is, make sure I get this right, Kayla. Are you the founder of Empowered Arizona Families?
Yes.
You are, right? Okay,
yes.
Good.
So make sure you go and follow her on Twitter. She's been, really destroying it on Twitter. I think her following's been growing pretty quickly in a short amount of time because she's really taking the arguments to test whenever people try to argue why she shouldn't be able to have school choice for her family. So go follow her. You can see her her @ sign down there @empowered_AF. That means Empowered _Arizona Families, not something else that you might be thinking. But Kayla, yeah, give us a little bit of a background with your experience with school choice in general, and maybe just your interest in education or kind of what you've been doing with Empowered Arizona Families.
Yeah, I didn't know until just like in the last year or so that like school choice was such a hot button issue. I kind of like dropped myself in the middle of this storm here. I think it's great though. We initially chose charter schools for our oldest daughter, but we went through the regular district with our younger. Both of them have some IEP needs, and we heard through a friend about the Empowerment Scholarship Account in Arizona. And I'm wearing my I Love ESA shirt today. And getting into that program, being able to get those scholarships for my girls, and like really individualize their education has been great. And we do different things with each of them because they have such different needs, just the two of them. And I have a son who is coming into preschool as a 3-year-old this year, and he's going to be on the program as well. He has like medical needs that need to be addressed with his education, where he wouldn't be able to easily access a normal classroom. So each one of my kids, will be using this program in a different way. And I think it's fantastic that families have the option to do that. It just always seemed like, a no-brainer to me. So the fact that people are like vehemently against me being able to choose what's right for my child is just, it doesn't commute. I don't get it.
So what are some of the arguments that people try to make against you whenever you ask, like, why shouldn't I be able to choose my school for my child? What can you go over some of these kind of exchanges you've had with people, and it doesn't have to be anyone in particular, but yeah, what are some of the what are some of the pushback you get, or do people just run away when you press them?
I've been in a couple mom groups that have, as the whole like Red for Ed thing started, the whole teachers union rise up that started in Arizona. Those kind of groups kind of became more vehemently like public school only type groups. And so whenever I would, say like, we're going to be using the ESA, or, we are having this issue here, or, my husband was teaching at a public district and was experiencing backlash himself. And it's just always this, it's your responsibility to make sure that your district school works. I'm like, no, it's my responsibility to make sure my child is having her educational needs met. And not just like educational needs, but that she's having her educational needs met without sacrificing her emotional and social and mental health needs too. And for my oldest daughter, it was getting to the point where towards the last year, towards the end of that year, the last year she was in school, she didn't like school anymore. She didn't like to learn. She didn't care. She thought she was stupid because she had struggles that other kids didn't have. When in reality, she was the youngest kid in that class because she was already a grade ahead. And when, outside of the stress and, structure of the classroom that didn't help her, outside of that, she was excelling far past these students. And so I'm like, even though you're like, oh yeah, she'll pass second grade, the damage that was being done to her on an emotional and a mental level, it was not worth it.
So now, well, I want to go back to January of this year real quick, just to touch on something. So was it it was February. So just a little more history.
Mm-hmm.
So Corey and I met you for the first time, I think, in February, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At our EFI's annual dinner. And so at that time, there was something that was going on, right? And leading up to that time.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your involvement with that whole situation and what happened and how you were involved?
Yeah, so in January, I believe it was January 27th, all the ESA parents woke up to find a story in the Yellow Sheet report saying, hey, we have your information, and we got it from the Department of Education. And the Department of Education had given a raw document file, an Excel file that was improperly redacted, to a volunteer for the anti-choice activist lobby, Save Our Schools. He gave it to, obviously he turned that information over to Save Our Schools, and he also gave it, he told two reporters at the Arizona Republic and at Capital Times, hey, by the way, go put in a Freedom of Information Act request for this specific thing, and you'll get all this information. So the department gave out our information, all of our names, addresses, phone numbers, not our children's names, but if we had a child with an IEP diagnosis, it gave out their diagnosis codes. So if you have a family that only has one child and they're on an IEP, well, you've identified that child, whether or not you've named them. Gave out all this information. And then we were all told as ESA families, like, because we're all like, well, what kind of recourse do we have against the department for releasing this information 3 times to 3 different people? And we are told, sorry, you have no private right of action, because the Department of Education is not a school, so they're not bound by FERPA regulations, even though in the handbook that they give ESA families to follow, says that they are going to protect our private information based on FERPA. But when we took it to the Attorney General and they went, well, we're not a school, so we're not bound by FERPA. And the AG goes, yeah, seems legit. So right now we're still kind of without any actual, right now we're just trying to figure out if we can't, if there's no recourse for what happened, what can we do to tie down the district from doing that again? Like, how can we prevent this from happening again to families? And that release of our information that's what started everything for me with Empowered Arizona Families, because, you know, we made national news. Like, it was a huge story, and
Mhm.
no one was talking to the ESA parents about it. It became a petty conversation about how much money was in 9 accounts out of, you know, over 7,000 accounts. And the only people that they were talking to were the people that want to end our program. They were getting all of this coverage, and then nobody asked them, like, so wait, you have this information, have you destroyed it? Like, do you realize, like, the huge, you know, unethical, you know, thing that is, that you are holding that information? And we found out through um other things here and there, hearing things, parents finding out that um, signature petitioners, because SOS was getting, they released an initiative that they tried to get signatures for and failed, but they were giving our addresses, like, you know, like red boxing, like, you know, hey, this house, don't go to this house because they won't support you,
Mm.
and like maps out of where we lived, you know, don't go to these ESA houses because they won't support you, and da 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 da. But they also didn't want us to, like, educate them on exactly how bad their initiative was for special needs kids, because it would have put a cap on our program and would have prevented 93% of special education kids in Arizona from ever being able to access the program.
So that's crazy. I mean, I think I remember seeing a lot of the backlash with this, you know, information getting out, and there were some people from some groups, I won't name them, I think you might have named them already, but it seemed like they were using this information as a way to try to attack the program by saying,
Yeah.
oh, look, there's these accounts that have a lot of money in them, and what are these parents doing with all of this money? But mathematically, the program and those same students would have gotten more money in the public school system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't see that as a very powerful argument anyway. One, it's unethical to use your private information and your students, you know, children's private information. They should have, you know, known better than to do that. But then two, their argument just didn't have any merit either, right? Like, if a parent's getting X amount in the scholarship program, I think it's what, 90% of the state level funding, so about half of what they would have gotten in the public schools. Okay, so if you're saying that, then
Federal money.
you must be saying that the public schools are, if you think that's a lot of money, you must be saying, oh, well, then public schools are certainly spending way too much money. I mean, it just didn't seem like a very great argument. But Kayla, you said that you had some experience with something called microschools. And I know there's a very popular microschool in Arizona called Prenda that everybody around the country is kind of talking about right now. If you look at Washington Post and elsewhere, they're calling them things like pandemic pods because, again, families are trying to figure something out because a lot of school districts are, you know, really trying not to reopen for X, Y, or Z reason, or they're saying that they're going to reopen, but only certain days of the week. And families are trying to get back to work, and they're trying to, you know, find somewhere for their children to receive a decent education. And so they're doing this kind of micro schooling thing. So can you talk about your personal experience and maybe how that kind of intersects with school choice in Arizona as well?
Yeah, so the Prenda model in Arizona is fantastic. It operates under a charter umbrella, so it's an option for, you know, tuition-free public school in Arizona, which is great for accessibility. And then for ESA families, because we can't use like public options because it's, you know, double dipping public funds, we have a tuition base that we can access Prenda through. And what's nice is that Prenda has set it up to benefit ESA families in that their tuition is lower than what the lowest ESA award amount is. So that also helps with access a lot as well. My oldest daughter went to a Prenda class last year. Her guide was wonderful. And really, she spent, last year was her first year in this program, the ESA program. And it was just a big year for like healing for her, getting back to like realizing that it was okay to like make mistakes. It was okay to go and search out what she wanted to know. And her guide really helped nurture that. And it was a class, I think at the most they had 11 for a couple weeks, but it was usually about 9 kids. And it was a great experience for us. It's not the 8 to 3 Monday through Friday. It's a little less time. It's 4 days a week, shorter days, but they get all of that stuff in that amount of time. You don't have to have like the fluff time, where we've got recess and we've got this extra time for transitions and moving from here to there and there. They're able to do a full day in a shorter time span, which is nice. And the kids still get that active time, that collaboration time, the independent time. And we really valued our Prenda class last year. We won't be doing Prenda this year with my oldest daughter because I'm teamed up. I teamed up with another mom that has a daughter same age, similar personality as my daughter, and we're actually directly hiring a certified teacher for her, which is another thing a lot of ESA families are doing, and it kind of brings that that group risk down even more, which is good and parents are looking for. But I think my younger daughter, who's just starting kindergarten and is in her last year at the private Montessori we have her at, with the ESA scholarship. When she goes into first grade, I'm going to be looking for a micro school for her because I think she would really benefit from that environment.
So the education dollars, you can use them for tutoring services, which is essentially what you're doing. You're not doing Prenda, but you're doing another kind of thing like Prenda, where you're just directly going to it and getting a teacher and kind of just doing it yourselves. So that's super interesting when it comes to the reopening debate, because in most states and for most families, if their school doesn't reopen, they're kind of tough out of luck, right? Especially if you don't have the funds to pay for a micro school out of pocket, or to pay for some other private alternative out of pocket. And so, we're seeing a lot of backlash, I think, at the national level. And Washington Post correctly noted that this could be a problem if you don't have school choice, right? So they noted that well-off families are going and forming their own micro schools in places like San Francisco and the Bay Area, and they correctly point out that this could lead to inequities. That some families won't be able to do this, but then they somehow didn't make the connection that, well, if you had school choice, less advantaged families would be able to do the same thing. So what do you think about, other states and what they should do with the school reopening problem? I mean, if you already have an ESA available, I think there's, it's kind of inconvenient to try to have to switch sectors and stuff. But if you have that money available and if the money can follow the child, I think you have a lot more meaningful options. So what would you tell, I guess, families in other states that don't have these kind of options, or what?
Yeah.
Or what would you tell lawmakers in other states?
Yeah, right. Because that's the thing. It needs to change. The fact that you don't have a choice needs to change. I think, especially right now with this upheaval with coronavirus and everything, we need to be more flexible across the board rather than more restrictive. And, in the States, I've seen you posting, where public schools aren't reopening and the union is coming out and saying, well, don't let charters or private schools open either. And I'm like, okay, let's just, kick all the kids to the curb. Like, what?
Milwaukee's doing that. The private schools are not allowed to reopen but the daycares are allowed to reopen. So amusement parks can be open, daycares can be open.
Yeah.
Exercise facility, but not schools. And so, that helps the public schools from a competitive standpoint, right?
Yeah.
If the private schools were reopening, people would be like, why aren't the public schools reopening as well? But if they're not.
Yeah. And so it's hard because I've posted on my personal page on Facebook, hey, Arizona families, did you know if your kid has a 504, they qualify for an ESA? Did you know you can get a 504 for something like asthma? Does your, that there are ways to access these options. You have to know that, though. If you don't know the ways to access the options, you can't access them. But then I've had friends from my my old city, Spokane in Washington. Hey, is that only Arizona? What can we do here? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's up in Washington. I was like, and I just kind of, did my own quick search and was like, contact these people here. One of my friends is having difficulty getting her child's IEP stuff met, which is a problem right now across the nation with families that have children that have IEPs, having those, the IDEA guidelines followed. IDEA regulations were not suspended because of the pandemic, and yet school districts are just leaving them, and not serving these kids at all. And sometimes not even attempting to serve these kids. I have a friend, an ESA mom, who has a daughter that has visual impairments. And at the beginning of all this stuff that happened, her district sent her worksheets home. She's like, okay, you can't use these. It has not pivoted very well. Like the big giant public system has not maneuvered well through this, and parents and children are the casualties of this. We're hearing a lot about, the teachers, and yes, there are some teachers that parents don't want to they don't want to sacrifice teachers either. I made a post that parents want safe options for their kids. They want teachers to get paid, but these things are they're not mutually exclusive. We can find ways and options to do this. And, sponsoring a private teacher for a small group of kids, that's one way we can do this. Teachers becoming micro school guides or teachers or whatever, is a way that they can do that. Our kids can still get quality education outside of, a building.
Well, and well-off families are already doing that. I mean, Washington Post identified that. Good Morning America just did a segment about it a couple of days ago where they're saying, look, well-off families are already doing this. This could lead to inequities. But then they're just not figuring out that, we could allow other families to do it too if you just allowed their education dollars to follow their child to wherever they're getting an actual education. So, and look, I mean, I think the Washington Post also mentioned something like the teachers were saying that they're making more than what they would have in the school system. And this is without the funding following the child. This is just, paying more out of pocket to be able to do this. So if you had a program in place where that said that, if your school isn't reopened, some of that money can go to the family, you cut out all the middleman and cut out all the administration and all the building costs, and you can pay teachers a lot more that way and have a smaller class size. So it seems like the way to do it. But I want to ask you. Oh, go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead. Well, I was going to pivot to another question, but
okay. Well, I'll stick with this one just for a second. So this was interesting. I was talking to a cousin of mine. She teaches science at a district school in another state, and she is she's very she loves her job. She's very invested in the district school system that she works in, and she loves it. She thinks it's fantastic. It was interesting to me to listen to her talk about how open and willing she was to consider a different way. I wouldn't have expected that out of her. I love this cousin. We grew up together. We had a great relationship. This is one thing where I was like, I don't know where she's going to fall on educational freedom, given her position. But it was interesting. She was saying, she's like, look, if I could find 10 families that would let me teach their kids science and math a couple times a week, then I might do it. And I was like, I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, what? I mean, that's amazing, right? Like, I think it's killer. It's a great idea. And I just thought it was, coming from her, I thought there's no way she would have. So it was interesting. I wonder how many teachers are out there that that are like that. I mean, and obviously the situation that we're all in has created a lot of uncertainty around what it would be like to go back to school, and so I get that, and obviously that's informing her position right now, or her willingness to do something like that. But this idea that teachers are being kicked to the curb or being forced into situations that they don't want to be in, where they maybe feel unsafe because of because of coronavirus and so on and so forth. Like, she figured it all out. She was like, I could teach science and math outside. Like, we go to the river and take water samples and do science at the river. And then we go to the forest and we do, like, whatever. And I was like, that's amazing. I think parents would be in love with that. Yeah. Right. Anyway, I think it's interesting that all of these different options that open up to people, and they're like, wow, maybe I'm not stuck in the system. Maybe there's a different way to do it. And if you fund students directly, then all of that opens up as possibility. Yeah. So what you're doing for your kids, just, and it's trial and error to some degree, right? Because every kid is different. So you think this is going to do it, and maybe that's not quite going to do it. Maybe it's a little tweak here, a little tweak there. So anyway, I was just going to throw that out there as it's interesting that people, even teachers, are opening up to the idea that there's a different way to educate kids, and it might not be in a classroom.
Yeah. And especially with like lower income families, like if they had direct access to their child's funding, then it wouldn't be an issue whether they could afford to do it, because it'd be the child's education funds paying for the child's education, which, shocker. So this idea that, we're going to widen these inequities by promoting these, pandemic pods is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Unless you're going to prevent low income families from having that option. It's not the high income families that are preventing the low income families from accessing the option. At this point, it is at a government level where these families are being forced to remain in that state because they won't give them those children's funds. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to. There are, in fact, Prenda specifically, there are micro schools in some of these low income communities that are, mostly, if not all, kids of color that are in these classrooms, these micro classes, and they're doing a fantastic job. I met a couple of the guides from areas around South Phoenix. I met them in March. I know probably February, I think, was when we had there was a big Prenda field trip to the Capitol, and several Prenda schools came, and there were like over 500 students there at the Capitol. It was awesome. And so I got to meet a few of these other guides and talk with them about, and each one of these micro classrooms have their own flavor, their own personality, because it's made up with those, handful of kids that are doing school in a way that works best for them. Mm-hmm. So some are more outside doing more things. Some spend a little bit more time on the computer because what they're doing with STEM and whatever works more on the computer. Some have very minimal computer time and, are more, hands-on projects. Like, my daughter's class, like they didn't spend a whole lot of time on the computer. A lot of it was, they were building things all the time. They were building all these things and, or doing different experiments and being outside and physics and real life type stuff, So each one of these classes is completely different. And you don't have going from one Prenda class to another, you're not going to get the same exact thing, because those kids need different things.
Yep.
And because it's being led by the students and it's driven by their interests and what they want to do, you're going to end up with a whole array of different experiences, and yet you see such success in it.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
it makes sense. And I just want to point out, I mean, the logic is crystal clear to fund students instead of the system, unless you're more concerned about the system than you are about the students. I mean, this money should go to the families, just like it does with other programs. I mean, if you have food stamps and your Walmart doesn't reopen, you don't have to continue giving your food stamp dollars to Walmart. You can take it to Trader Joe's or Safeway or Whole Foods or some other place. If your community college doesn't reopen, you can take your Pell Grant dollars to another university that does reopen. With pre-K funds, you can take those dollars to another location. In Arizona, you can take your education savings accounts to another provider, a micro school, some other provider of the service. So I think this just makes so much sense, and more places should do this. Kayla, I want to get your quick reaction on this, because I thought it was totally crazy that Arizona, so in Arizona, just for listeners, the governor had an executive order saying that schools, for education's sake, cannot reopen until at least August 17th. So it's like maybe 3 or 4 weeks, about a month from now. But then some school districts, one in particular that I've noticed, Gilbert Public Schools, they're not reopening their schools, but they're doing this. They're reopening them in elementary schools and calling them child care centers. And hey, if you want access to this, well, we're going to charge you $160 a week on top of what you're already paying in your property taxes. Kayla, as a family that lives in Arizona, what are your thoughts on what this school district is doing and essentially charging families twice?
Yeah, I think it's crazy to think that if we're going to put a bunch of kids in the school, that it's not safe if it's school, but it's safe in the exact same place if it's daycare. But
or it's sad, like daycare workers are expendable, but the teachers, but
not teachers. Well, because daycare workers, hourly workers, they don't have a union to protect them, right? So,
this
doesn't solve an inequity problem, because guess who can't afford $160 per week for childcare?
Exactly.
Low-income families whose kids still aren't going back to school, who still need to work. In fact, their jobs are probably like more crucial to their families in a day-to-day capacity for them than the families that don't, So if we're calling out options for causing or worsening inequity, this does that. This worsens inequity. Because the families that also have work, and it's much more crucial that their families that they work, they cannot afford these kind of options either.
I mean, this is totally nuts. Families are already paying for the education system, and one part of the education system that has always been provided is the child care service part of the education system. And now they're saying, well, we're going to watch the kids like we were always doing in the same places. And I'll show you the list of elementary schools that are doing this. They're school buildings. We're just going to call it something else, and we're going to provide you just with watching the kids. We're not going to provide you with the education part. And oh, by the way, we're going to charge you more than what we were charging before, which this is just baffling. I watch things all across the United States, and this is the first place that I've seen that's actually doing something like this. And to me, it seems unconstitutional at the state level, at least, because every state has a provision saying that the state needs to provide a free public education. They're not doing that. They're providing schooling essentially at elementary schools, and they're charging people for it in addition to what they're already paying. This is like a private school saying, hey, private schools can't be open, but we're going to rename ourselves to a daycare center. And we know you already paid us tuition, but if you really want us to watch your kids, we'll still do it, but we're not going to give you your money back. Oh, and by the way, pay us double tuition, pay us $160 a week. that's extortion. That's like the definition of extortion. If a private school were to be doing that, that's what we would call it.
Yeah.
Here's a list. Here's a list of the child care centers. They're elementary schools.
Yeah, it's that was poor judgment right there.
In the middle of this pandemic, are we worried about saving the schools or saving our students? And that's just what I keep, thinking back to, why can't we focus on the kids and what is best for them, and how do we continue to make sure that they receive an education in a safe and affordable way, and putting schools over students, it will never be ethical to me.
It makes sense from a competitive standpoint. If you have a monopoly, you're going to fight really hard to keep it that way, even if you're a private provider of the service. Let's say, give me an example of a company. Let's say HEB. You don't have HEBs in Arizona, but Safeway, maybe Safeway grocery stores. If they had a situation set up where everybody had to pay them regardless of whether they reopened, regardless of whether they gave you groceries. If you had food stamps, you had to shop at Safeway. Safeway would fight really, really hard to keep it that way, and they would make up reasons for this. They'd say, "Oh, look, we serve less advantaged populations of families. So if you allow people to take their food stamps elsewhere or their grocery store dollars elsewhere, oh, you're going to hurt the least advantaged." They would make these types of arguments. And they would do it, and they'd say, "Save our Safeway," right? They'd say, "Save our grocery store," and it's like, no, the money should go to the families, like it currently does in the current system. But because there's this monopoly set up in the school system, we have a whole different dynamic where we have this crazy arguments about saving the schools instead of actually saving the kids and saving the students and providing the dollars to the children directly. It just doesn't make sense, but it does make sense if you look at it through the lens of protecting a monopoly. And that's just the incentives that you have in play, right?
Well, and real quick, just to put this into context. So $160 a week, there are 38 weeks in a school year, in a typical school year. Okay. And so you do 38 times 160 gives you $6,080 for the school year. Not that they'll be in the whole school year, but if you just extrapolate it out, that's what you're getting, right? The average student in Arizona right now, and this is average, I want to say it's between district and charter. Anyway, it's approximately, if you just pile everybody in, you're approximately around $9,000. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting 2/3 of the tuition, 100, what is that? 166% essentially tuition, because you're taxing.
You're
getting the 9,000, and you're getting another 6,000 for the kids that come in that would be in school.
Look, ACLJ is taking up lawsuits, and I think they're actually looking into this particular example from information that I've heard. ACLJ may be taking up lawsuits on this because the state says they're going to provide a free public education. Well, one, if the schools aren't reopening, they're not doing so. And if the schools are charging you on top of what they're already charging you in taxes, well, that's not a quote unquote free system of public education. So we've seen 22 other states and families in 22 other states already file some sort of lawsuits. Since I last heard, there might be families in Arizona doing the same thing, but it's on ACLJ's radar right now, especially what's going on in Gilbert public school system. So there could be some legal fights in Arizona as well. It's an interesting kind of thing going on, and I couldn't believe it when I first heard this a couple, I think I just heard about this yesterday evening. It just blows my mind. Yeah. But Kayla, I want to get on to something that's super interesting that was that we talked about on the Random Assignment podcast with Bob Bowden and myself that happened over the last few weeks, where you got into a scuffle with a pretty prestigious scholar named Andre Perry Dr. Andre Perry, who's affiliated with the Brookings Institution. And he was kind of making arguments against school choice. And you were kind of, on the other side saying, well, why shouldn't I be able to have school choice for my children? I'm already doing it. Why would you want to take that away from me? And he didn't really seem like getting any good arguments. And so I want you to kind of just detail the arguments back and forth, and maybe some of the context, what his arguments were, what your arguments were, and maybe you can even go over, like, you had a pretty great piece in the Hechinger report detailing this conversation too. So
yeah, so one of my friends and people that I follow on Twitter, Jason Bedrick from EdChoice, he was sharing a polling data showing that parents of color support school choice. The majority of parents of color support school choice. They want school choice options. And Dr. Perry just like dismissed him out of hand because he was white and was, okay. I was like, that's ridiculous. This is a ridiculous reason to tell someone that what they're saying is invalid when he's not giving an opinion. He's not saying, like, this is what I think, this is my point of view. He's like, just here's some data. Mm-hmm. You don't invalidate the data based on, like, the person who's showing it to you. There's lots of reasons to maybe invalidate data, but look at how the study was run, a bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, it's like, if that's what it says, if those people responded and they said, yes, I want school choice benefits me, and these are Black parents of color, you don't say, no, that's racist. No, you're centering on whiteness. That the school choice, school reform thing is all about this idea of white supremacy in education, and just on and on, with making it like a race issue in the wrong way. Like, it was like, yes, there are issues in the public system that perpetuate the problems in racial disparity and inequity. The solution to that is not to keep the communities of color locked into the public district. And so I came into that Twitter conversation and was like, parents of color deserve the respect to exercise their own agency. Mm-hmm. I choose school choice. It benefits my children. It would have benefited me as it did benefit me, as a child. Like, we didn't have the same school choice options that in Nevada at the time that we do in Arizona, but my mom was able to get a zone variance for me to leave the one school that I was in to go to a better school. And in his whole thing about, people that want school choice, that want ed reform, are doing so, and it's hurting Black families. It didn't hold water. That argument doesn't hold water, especially when you have communities of color saying, no, let us have control over our children's education. Let us, exercise these options that are available, that are always available to more affluent communities. Mm-hmm. And, and it's not just about, it's not just about whether, like, what options are there. It's about whether the access to the options are there. Mm-hmm. And, he blocked me on Twitter. I'm still blocked on Twitter. I'm like, okay, sure. Because I had found out that, he had sent, his child to a private school, which, okay, cool, great.
Good for you.
But
yeah.
You're also saying that other Black families shouldn't be able to make the choice themselves.
That's strange. Yeah. And did he respond when you asked him about that, or?
He was like, he came up, he's like, oh, I don't need people investigating my life. I'm like,
that's not a response.
It honestly wasn't a big investigation. Like, I didn't know who he was. Okay. Again, I like brand new to this whole like school choice world, all these things. I don't know any of these people. I'm like, who is this guy? So I was scrolling through Twitter, like trying to read up things that he had written, conversations he had. Like, who was he? I have no idea who he was. And that's when, like, I stumbled across this information that he had sent his kid to private school, and I was like,
so it's already publicly available information.
Yeah,
And I mean,
know
his response is just a way for him to not have to answer why it's okay for him to choose, but not other families to choose.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
exactly.
at the end of the day, that's just a deflection, right? I mean.
Yeah. I think Diane Ravitch like called me like disgusting or something. Like she was like,
it's a badge of honor.
She sent her kids to private
nobody
school.
should be like investigating your life, and it's disgusting how low these people will stoop. And I'm like, okay, Diane.
She sent her own kids to private school as well, so like, she has to say
that. So of course she's going to make that same argument. But yeah, it's just a way to avoid the question of why is it okay for advantaged families to choose schools for their kids, but whenever we're talking about low-income families that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it, now it's a big issue. Now it's a big problem.
Diane's like, oh, nobody should be investigating your life. But by the way, if you're going to homeschool your kid, I'm going to be all up in your business.
Right.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
There are only like two, I don't know, there may be more than this, but the two reasons that I can come up with that people hold this position where they can send their own kid to private school, i.e. exercise choice for their own kids, but then fight against it for everyone else. I can only come up with two. Maybe you guys can come up with some more. One is they benefit somehow personally from holding the position publicly, meaning maybe they have some affiliation with a union or an association that benefits them in some way, whether monetarily or professionally or some other way. Okay, that's number one. Number two is they just have this paternalistic view of where they feel like I'm educated enough in order, that I can make choices for my own kids because I'm smart, I'm intelligent, I went to school, yada, 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 but you are not. And because you're poor, because you're uneducated, because fill in the blank, whatever, you're not like me, right? Whatever that is, then you can't choose for yourself. Are there any other reasons?
Yeah.
Hey, go for
it.
So
those are the two reasons that I think that are, the most powerful reasons that they actually hold. But I think there's one more that they say, at least publicly, that they try to defend themselves. And they'll say, well, I paid for it out of pocket. And so therefore I didn't defund the public schools when I did so. And because I paid out of pocket, you shouldn't be able to do so. But look, I mean, these same people
they did defund the public schools by doing
this. Yes, exactly.
Because public schools get enrollment vouchers, seat in butt money. So if their seat isn't in the butt, they don't get the money. It doesn't matter if you're paying extra. I mean, because you're still paying tax dollars. They're just not going to the school.
Yeah.
So they're paying extra. Like it doesn't.
So Kayla, you've already unlocked the superpowers of being able to attack the school choice myths, and you've just started this. And so mad kudos to you. This takes years and years for most people to understand how to get to attack these responses. But yeah, the financial impact is this exact same whether you pay out of pocket or use a voucher, because it's based on enrollment counts. So again, why is it okay for rich people to defund the public schools when they pull their kids out? And I mean, you look at people like Elizabeth Warren, who explicitly say that, well, you shouldn't pull your kids out of the public schools if you don't like them. You should keep your kids there and make them better. But you didn't do that when you pulled Alex Warren out of the public schools. You didn't keep him there and wait decades for things to change. That the reality is families shouldn't have to wait they certainly shouldn't have to wait decades. They shouldn't have to wait a year. They shouldn't have to wait another day to get a better education for their kid. They should be able to pull their kids out immediately, and they shouldn't have to. That decision, shouldn't be blocked by this possibility of things getting better in a few years. No way.
People should be. I mean, the people that want to save these public dollars, they should be glad that parents go, "Oh, I'm qualified for this program," and then just up and out. Because if I stay, like, I cannot imagine the amount of money that, is lost because schools are using public dollars to fight against parents.
Mm-hmm.
Countless IEP meeting after IEP meeting because they won't serve the kid. They won't give them the services they need. They won't give them the disability qualifications that they need. Like, I had to, my younger daughter still is stuck with an eligibility category that's not accurate, because they didn't want to give her something else. And so it's just the amount of time. And then the parents that actually go through like due process, or just not even get to due process, but just have to request like an outside evaluation because the evaluation the school did was lacking and missed a whole bunch. In fact, my older daughter, when we had her evaluation, it was fine and good, but like the school psychologist didn't, like, there was all these like red flags, and both me and her teacher. So a lot of times, you hear parents are like, his teacher was part of that fight against me too. But no, me and my daughter's teacher were on like the same side of the table, and we're like, you guys are missing stuff. Like, there's this big red truck issue right here, and you are trying to sidestep it. So they had to pay for an outside evaluation, which is more public dollars used. And then parents have to go to due process sometimes when their outside evaluations are dismissed by the school, and they go, no, we don't want to use that. And so they have to take them to due process. And then the parents have to pay out of pocket for attorneys and advocates and all this other stuff, while the school is using more and more public money to fight against serving a kid.
That's totally ridiculous. And so I want to get on another school choice myth related to this, Kayla. A lot of people will say, oh, school choice is horrible for students with special needs because, they don't have the IDEA protections that are doing such a great job in the public school. So what is your response to that?
IDEA is not doing a great job in the public school. It's a fantastic idea. No pun intended. But it has no teeth. You can't make a school follow IDEA regulations without fighting and, bleeding through so much more public money. IDEA is a fantasy to a lot of special education families, and FAPE is a lie. Kids, like, public schools deny FAPE to students every day. Especially,
and for listeners, what is FAPE? What does FAPE mean?
FAPE is free and appropriate public education. And FAPE is being denied to students, especially students with disabilities and special needs, every single day. Especially right now during the pandemic, where kids are sent home and they're like, well, have fun learning on Zoom, guys. Yay, Zoom classrooms. Well, great. My ADHD kid can't focus on that. My hearing impaired kid can't hear that. My visually impaired student, shocker, can't do worksheets. So it's all these things. And if they were working, if they were doing what they were supposed to, maybe there wouldn't be as many issues. But the thing is while private schools are not bound by IDEA regulations, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, if I take my child to a private school and I say, these are the needs that she has, and they say, well, we don't have a speech therapist, we can't give her speech therapy, or, we don't have this, kind of sensory thing, whatever. I can say, okay, I have the ability, or I'll look for those outside, but I like this model, so I can still consciously choose. Like, I still am in control, whether I say, yes, I would still like her to go here. And they say, okay, we can take her, just knowing that we can't serve these needs. Or if they're like, you know what, your child has so many needs that we are not equipped to serve, so we can't accept your student. I would rather have them say sorry, no, and not take my money than take all the money and still not serve my kid, which was what was happening in the public school. They have to take them. Okay, but they're not serving them. So I would rather able to control that. And like, if I have to hire 3-4 different people with her education money, then I'll do that. If someone's not working out, I can say, you know what, we're going to use a different person. We're going to go to a different place. It's still prerogative.
And I think that highlights the importance of why ESAs as a mechanism for school choice is the best way to go. Because look, the one school you choose doesn't have to be everything for every student, and doesn't have to provide every single service. Like you said, you could like a particular type of schooling, use some of your education savings account for that, but then you can kind of outsource to elsewhere to do the other types of services that are needed that the school doesn't provide. So, I mean, whereas in a voucher, you don't really have that flexibility. So, for listeners who don't know the difference, vouchers typically can only be used for private school tuition and fees. ESAs, the money, literally goes into a savings account for the family, and then you can use it for a bunch of different providers. And I think it's a good way to think about it. It's a good point.
Yeah. And that's what makes, because people will say, oh, no new vouchers in Arizona, no voucher expansions. And they're talking about the ESA program. And it's disingenuous, because the ESA program is not a voucher. Vouchers are when state money goes directly to an institution on behalf of an individual, or the scholarship goes to the individual to use at their discretion. And, the Empowerment Scholarship account is a scholarship account. And then the money is able to roll over in that child's account. It doesn't get pooled for the family. So I have one child that has a lot of funding and one child that has, less funding. I can't combine them. So I can only spend child A's money on child A and child B's money on child B. And then once they are finished with school, and there are a couple of different ways people can exit the program at the end of their school career. But when they leave the program, if there's money left over in that account, like some of those large amounts accounts from before we were talking about, that money gets rolled back into the state. It doesn't just end up as a retirement fund for the kid. It doesn't follow them, to infinity and beyond. It's public money. It gets put back in the public's, into the general fund.
And it seemed like the other side was trying to say oh, look, they're just pocketing this cash. They're rolling it over each year and they're going to pocket it and run.
Yeah. They put this money, they get private transfers into their accounts. No, we don't. No, we don't. There's even because there are two, we're in the middle of transitioning into a third-party system called Class Wallet. And it's a third-party paying system. But before we were transitioning into Class Wallet, they used Bank of America and prepaid cards. So the money would be dispersed onto that card, and we could use that card online, in person, whatever, to pay for the services and goods that we need. But just because it's Bank of America doesn't mean, because I bank with Bank of America, I can't connect those accounts. They don't combine.
So Kayla, similarly, the other side could say, oh, what, you got a debit card? You must just be going out and buying big screen TVs and, fancy vacations or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What's your response to that?
No. Prepaid, the way that is set up, we are restricted on the MCC code. So I can't just I can't go to Bed Bath & Beyond or Disneyland. And
darn it.
Crazy. Because it's restricted on, there are very few MCC codes, the manufacturer credit card code, that you can use it for. And then on top of that, whenever you spend money, you have to account for every cent you spend. So every quarter, we are accounting down to the literal penny what we spent money on. We have to upload our receipts, our invoices, whatever. Sometimes the reports come back to us and they say, this isn't approved. And then you have to go, it's approved. I have this email. I have this. Here it's what it says in the handbook. This is what it describes the program that we've used, or the curriculum, or the supplemental material, whatever. And you go back and forth a few times. And it can be frustrating. Hopefully switching to this new system, Class Wallet, once we get everyone over there and we're trying to iron out a few kinks, it should prevent having to do those large scale reports, because everything should be approved ahead of time. So we shouldn't be dealing with like denials and stuff, because it should be preventing any purchases of non-approved items. Because sometimes it's something simple like, oh, well, you bought this curriculum bundle, but it came with a toy. You can't buy toys on ESA, so rejected. So you have to go back to the place where you bought the curriculum and be like, can you give me a refund for this stupid toy, and charge it to a different card or whatever. And you have to go back and show them like, I got a return, because you'll have your account frozen for these things. Sometimes with the card, sometimes if you're using it like in a bookstore or something, sometimes those card readers can be compromised. And so people have had their card number stolen, but usually when that happens, the person who has the card information tries to use it somewhere where the MCC code is already blocked. So you'll get like an attempted charge that doesn't go through. But then your account still gets suspended until you tell them, I talked to Bank of America. They closed the card, or they're issuing me a new card, whatever. Like it didn't go through. Like for me personally, 2 months ago, there was an attempted charge for $4 at a pizza place. Froze my daughter's account for like 3 weeks. While I was going through and telling them like, hey, well, because my wallet was actually stolen. And so I was going through calling all of the cards, but I had so much anxiety about my ESA cards. I called Bank of America first. I was like, shut the cards off, shut them off, send me new ones. And then I sent an email to the department before they sent one to me. And I'm like, this happened. I have no idea if there are any charges on it. Just know that now. I already got it fixed. They still suspended my account until I got the new cards. So the whole idea that there's no oversight for our program, there's no accountability for our program. There's no school district in our state that has to account for their dollars as much as ESA parents do.
Oh, yeah.
And the AG did the investigation, right? When did they do that? Was it early this year? I want to say, or late last year?
Earlier this year, or like late last year, like not very long ago.
Yeah.
6-ish months ago, probably. And it showed that out of all of the spending for ESA, that $30, which is less than 0.01% of all ESA money, was successfully misspent anywhere.
Yeah, so it's crazy. It's like
$30.
Because that was the narrative that for the people that were attacking the ESA families, they were saying, look at all this money, it's being misspent. They're going and buying big screen TVs and they're buying yada, yada, yada. And it turns out, no, they're not actually.
Yeah. People made public comments at one of the House or Senate hearings of one of the ESA bills, said that ESA parents were buying jet skis. Like, it's on public record, someone accusing us of buying jet skis. And we're like, how absolutely ridiculous can you be? No one is. When you
get back in town, I expect that we're going up to Saguaro Lake.
Right?
Kayla, we're gonna go out on the lake.
Well, and what's frustrating is, while obviously we're not trying to buy stupid, ridiculous stuff like that, we're prevented from buying legitimate things. And some of it is in statute, some of it is just in like handbook rules. But like in public school, they pay and let students use like things like Chromebooks.
Yeah.
We are prevented in statute from buying any laptops. And then there's handbook regulations for technology that we're not allowed to buy without jumping through a whole lot of hoops. But that's easily available to kids in the public system.
That's a good point. The public schools have these things, and so why can't the families do the same things for their kids when they're not in the public schools? That doesn't make any sense. So hopefully that changes. But a similar school choice kind of argument that's been made is that, Kayla, well, when you're spending these dollars for your child, those are public dollars, and we need public accountability over those dollars. And if you send your kid to a private school, those private schools aren't accountable. How do you respond to that?
They are accountable to me for how they serve my child, because my child is the beneficiary of those public dollars, and they are made for educating her. So if the private institution that I've selected, be it like a small private Montessori or a large private school, if they're not meeting her needs, they're accountable to me.
Boom.
And I can take my dollars with her and put her somewhere else. And people do. There is that public accountability, and there's public accountability again in how we have to report what we're spending on. So I have to show, I use my child's education money to pay for her education.
That makes
and
sense.
This is where we did it.
Good. You're really good at hitting all the devil's advocate questions, and you haven't really been in in this for too long, but you've been a mom, and you've had to deal with this kind of crap firsthand in Arizona that school choice advocates have been having to deal with for a long time now. So I love your responses to that. One more. So you've had, kind of experience with micro schools. You're planning on doing the micro school thing at a not with Brenda, but with another private tutor or teacher or guide or whatever you want to call it. So how is your child going to get socialization? And a lot of people who don't want to do the micro school thing or homeschool thing are just concerned about this idea of children not getting enough adequate socialization or something like that. What is your experience with that, and maybe your response?
I always thought that was really funny, because school is not the only place where you get socialization. In fact, even when my daughter was in school, she went to a public school from kindergarten up through second grade. Her best friends were not in school. They weren't her class wasn't the ones that she invited to her birthday parties. It was from other activities that we were involved in, extracurriculars, her soccer team, her dance class stuff, kids at church. The idea that the only legitimate socialization that your children are going to get is going to be in a classroom that is homogenized by age is that was never my experience either. And I went through public school K through 12, and my best friends and the people that I interacted with, it happened in more organic ways, in different things that I pursued outside of school. Not that I don't have, I still have some friends that I went to school with, but the idea that, this is where your kid's going to learn how to behave in society. Well, last I checked, society was not just a bunch of people my age either. My daughter has friends that are much older and younger than her. So to expect her in a class of 28-year-olds, is crazy.
It's so unnatural too. I mean, when you're outside of school, you interact with people from different age groups, and you're not just in this one building. You can go out into the community and interact with different social settings. And you're right. There's other ways to do that and to get socialization. And I mean, there's a lot of negative socialization that goes on in schools too, right? The bullying that is just horrible for students' mental health, and they shouldn't have to go through that each day.
Micro schools too, those are usually, you're not there Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. It's not like a whole day, all day thing. School should not be a full-time job for kids. And with these micro schools, pod schools, I have a friend who does cottage school with 4 other moms, I think, and it's just their own little kind of co-op thing. They don't do it, 40 hours a week, it's much less than that. So the idea that, you only have that idea if you think that kids are going to be in a classroom for that long, all day long. So if my kid was doing 40 hours a week with just 4 other kids, it'd be kind of weird, but she's not doing that much time there. She's out doing a lot of other things with a lot of other people. And we give her a lot of social experiences.
Yeah, and when I was in public schools, I did public schools K through 12 as well. My teacher always told me, yes, sit still, be quiet, stop socializing. So it's not like the public schools are bastions of socialization where you're just allowed to socialize all day. Yeah. Homeschoolers have a lot more time to actually do those things because they don't have so much structured kind of lecturing going on. So, I mean, look, Kayla, we've already been 10 minutes over the hour. I think this is our longest Educational Freedom Institute podcast ever. And I think it's actually one of our best ones, if not our best podcast. So we need to have some more mothers and parents and families who are actually on the ground experiencing school choice programs. So hopefully you can set us up with some more interviews with great school choice parents in Arizona, because this was a super great conversation. I'm so happy we did this. And look, you totally destroyed all of the devil's advocate questions.
And I think a lot of parents can, because again, like, I'm not a scholar, I am not a PhD, I'm not, part of any of these institutions, because so many times, like, you have people that completely dismiss based, oh, well, you're from EdChoice. Oh, you're from and just dismiss it out of hand because, well, guess what? I'm not. I'm just a mom, and this makes sense for my kid. And it makes sense for a lot of other kids. And while not every mom can get up there, not every parent can get up there and speak to these things as candidly, like, because I want to be able to use that on their behalf as well. But there are a lot of great parents that I have met through all of this too, that can, speak to it just as well.
But you're very heavily.
You're a rock star.
And you're getting tons of cash from somebody.
Oh yeah, all this dark money.
I have to point out that the dean of the University of Kentucky's Graduate School of Education, his first interaction with you, or one of the first that I saw, was he asked you, Kayla, where's your funding come from? You must be biased in some way. And you said, look, I'm just a mom. And our whole group is just this grassroots movement of mothers
who are families. Is not a 501c3 yet. I mean, it's in my plans, but for right now, I kind of find benefit in not being. When he's out there asking for my 990s, and I'm like, I don't actually have those.
First of all,
he's giving me money.
That's a ridiculous argument to make, to be the first argument for someone who proclaims to be a doctor and to be very intellectual. That's a straight ad hominem attacking your background and your funding. It's not attacking the logic of your arguments. That's ridiculous. But then two, he hit a roadblock because that wasn't going to work with you. And I think that's excellent. And the school choice movement needs moms and dads and family members to stand up for themselves, because look, you guys are the main beneficiaries of being able to use these programs. And I think it's great that you have this group out in Arizona, Empowered Arizona Families, actually doing this. We need more of this to happen. So hopefully.
Completely volunteer run. I don't make a salary. Other moms that are working with me, they don't make a salary. We have a donate button on our website. So, I mean, feel free. but so far, any money that we are spending on advertising the program or whatever, boosting posts and stuff, is coming from my bank account, which, I'm not out there doing a lot of that, but we have a lot of volunteer stuff. We've gotten some great help from parents that are talented in many diverse ways, but right now we're volunteer run, and right now it works for us. So
that's cool.
Good so look, I'm not going to keep you any longer. We could stay talking with you until the nighttime. This was such a great conversation, Kayla, and I just want to
having me on.
And look, we're going to have you back on again, because this is I think we had some of the best responses and comments going on during this conversation. So they really loved that we had you on the show. And we again want to thank you for taking your time out of your day to discuss this with us. And I just want to tell everybody, make sure you follow their organization, Kayla's organization, at empowered_AF. That is at empowered_AF. Follow them on Twitter. And I think they might also be on Facebook as well. I'll share that in the comments. But until next time, I want to thank all the listeners for engaging with Kayla, and thanks Kayla again for joining us. This was the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. We'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thanks.